Hello everyone, welcome back to the SMITE Comprehensive Guide to Odin. This is an update because Jonas Rodriguez was asking about Odin's build, but that was on a video from a year ago, and that's not up to date anymore. So we're going to update Odin's build guide here while waiting for me to get a good example of a Fafnir game in Conquest. It's kind of hard getting support games in Conquest right now because Karen is new and everyone wants to be Karen. So... or Charon, or however you want to pronounce it. But anyways, let's talk about Odin. So Odin has two roles that are really great for him, solo lane and jungle. So I'm going to talk about the solo lane first, because that's typically where he winds up. Now, your starter item is going to come down to a personal preference for you. You can either go Blue Stone Pendant, or you can go with the Warrior's Axe. I have a personal preference for the Warrior's Axe because it goes really hard with Glad Shield, which is really good on Odin, but that's again a personal preference. Bluestone Pendant is a slightly more aggressive version, so it really depends on how aggressive you are as a player. If you want to hit a little harder, go Bluestone. If you want to survive a little longer, go Warrior's Axe. For this example, I'm going to run Warrior's Axe because that is my preference, but just be aware that Bluestone is the more damaging option. Alright, for your second item, you have primarily technically four great options. I'll talk about the technically fourth. Now, if you want to sustain, Soul Eater is the way to go. Alright? This is fairly interesting. This does give you a nice little power spike. And what's really interesting about Odin, very specifically, where is the stacks? Hello? There it is. Boom. What's really interesting about Odin is, with just these two items, I haven't even evolved Warrior's Axe. Keep in mind I have all 10 stacks of my passive, which is 50 power. But we're hitting 105 power here, and you can see how well his abilities scale. Right? We have 75 or so percent here. We've got 50% here. The pulse damage is 20%. The Gungnir damage is, I want to say, it's 60. And Ring of Spears is like between 75 and 80%. I think it's 77, but I'm not sure about that. It's less than 80. I can tell you that much. But anyways, he has pretty high power scaling, right? So you can absolutely go with the Soul Eater. You are actually going to heal a little bit more than you would normally expect. You get a decent amount of power. Your abilities will heal you, which is really nice. Especially when you use the famous Bird Bomb combo, right? There we go. Say, for instance, where, you know, we're in a fight with a hunter and it's spooky and we're taking a lot of damage. We're going to go on ahead and pulse this. There we go. And then, boom. We get a decent amount of healing there and slap. Right? But the real advantage of Soul Eater on Odin is Ring of Spears kills all healing of the enemy team. So once you've got some people in your ring, you're healing, they are not. It can often give you a bit more of an edge than a lot of people will expect or prepare for. Okay? This is also why you don't really need a whole lot of anti-heal on Odin, if ever. There are a few really extreme healer comps I've faced over the years that have still required me to grab anti-healing even as Odin, but these are few and far between because most teams will only include one or two people that heal, themselves or others. So a lot of the times this isn't really necessary, and even then, it would take more than 3 healers on a team to really convince me to go anti-healing on Odin in light of his Ring of Spears, alright? And even then, there's a better solution for that, but I'll talk about that in a second. But you do have Soul Eater as that sort of damage option. It is going to heal you. It is going to give you an edge in your ult. Your second option here is actually really interesting, Dawnbringer. Now, Dawnbringer is really nice as a second item because it's going to give you some health, it's going to give you some power, and for the rest of the game, obviously, whenever you blast out your ult, your protections and move speed increase by 10%. For each enemy god near you, stacking 3 times. So in other words, up to 3 enemy gods are going to give you this benefit. when you use your ult, you're going to want to obviously be using it near as many enemies as possible, so you're going to be in a position when you use Odin's ult to make this really beneficial for you. Alright, I don't normally build this as a second item. It is a good option because it does, the base, let me put it this way, the base stats of this item, 30 power, 250 health, 20% crowd control reduction, these are great second item stats. Passive, a little bit more useful at the end game. We are talking about a percentage increase, which tends to be, I mean, you can see right here at this early stage of the game, we'd be getting like 10 extra physical protections in solo lane. Keep in mind it would be 1v1 most of the time. If we're getting ganked and we use our ult, it would be 20 protections, which isn't a whole lot, right? So I tend not to build this as a second item, but if you like this a lot and you're not really fond of the Soul Eater idea, this makes for a great substitute. Your third option, technically speaking, is, which has the similar problems, is Heartseeker. This is going to give you some power, it's going to give you some mana. It's also going to give you some MP5, which is of great benefit since Odin is absolutely a mana hog. He uses a ton of mana. He's very ability based, which can get him in trouble if he's facing an enemy who is an auto-attacker, and in fact, this is what Odin's main problem is as a solo laner. He does not have a whole lot of built-in sustain. In fact, he doesn't have any. His whole build is based primarily around the idea of denying the enemy sustain. It's why his ult has anti-healing, like complete nullification of healing. Because most warriors have some form of sustain. Usually this is HP regeneration. Go ahead and check. Most warriors have some form of self-heal. Vamon used to, but they changed his self-heal and his ult to a health shield instead. Which has its pros and cons. One day I'll talk about them. But Heartseeker this early does give you that power, does give you that mana and MP5, which really helps. The penetration that early isn't really that big of a deal. It's only 10% pen early on in the game. The passive really doesn't make a huge difference. 2% of the target's maximum health is not, again, a really big deal. I don't really build this too often in the second. I think I've only built this once as the second item. A lot of the times it's better as a last item. Similar to the Dawnbringer or Dawnbreaker. I think it's Dawnbringer. Similar to Dawnbringer, it's not a bad item. The core stats are really nice, but the passive really doesn't mean that much in the early game. Same thing with the Dawnbringer, right? The last option is of most interest. The mystical earrings. Just the earrings. Why? Because what's terribly interesting about warriors is you may or may not have heard of the class bonuses, right? Well, warriors class bonuses is, and I'm not sure it's going to show it here. Yeah, it is. You can see right down there that without me having built any cooldown, I have 10% cooldown reduction. This is because all warriors at level 20 get 10% cooldown reduction. That scales up as time goes on, right? So we're already operating just at a basic level off of 10% cooldown reduction once we hit level 20. Right, it's at 5% when we're level 10. You know the drill. Well, if you really want to ult bot, you can grab the mystical earrings as your second item, and then at the end of the game, you can increase all the way up to the Sphinx's Baubles and run 50% cooldown reduction and really spam your abilities everywhere. Alright, I don't personally like this because it does reduce your magic and physical protections by 10%, which isn't the biggest deal, but the better your protections are, the farther your shield will go, right? Your protections also benefit your shield. So it, again, comes down to your preference. It comes down to how often you want to be able to ult, basically, because that's where you're going to see the biggest impact of Sphinx's Baubles. We're going to leave this here for now. I'll come back to the other second items. But for our third item, I'm going to assume the enemy is physical. Going to grab Gladiator's Shield. All of your abilities do damage. Having your abilities do an additional 15 plus 30% of your protections is extremely nice. Alright? This is really quite impactful. It gives you some cooldown, gives you physical protections, the bonus damage, of course, the health. It's just a great item. Alright, obviously if your landing opponent is magic, you're going to want magic protections. I typically, whenever I do run magic protections, well, we'll talk about that actually. For your fourth item, you typically, these days, because of the Stygian Beacon, typically want to run your dual protections, your double protections. Alright? And you have a couple of options for that. Okay, my personal preference is Spirit Robe. You get 35 of each protection, you get 10% cooldown, you get 20% cooldown reduction, which is great, and you get 15% mitigation, damage mitigation, whenever you're hit by hard CC. If you happen to slap your shield on right before you get hit with that hard CC, you're not going to be looking at that much damage unless the entirety of the enemy team is dogpiling you, in which case you're probably still doomed. But in 1v1 scenarios, or even smaller fights where you're fighting off 2, possibly 3 enemies, and you get crowd controlled, this can save your life a lot of times, especially with a well-timed Raven Shield. Okay, so I'm really fond of this. If you have a personal preference for Mantle of Discord, that's totally fine. Also a really strong pick. The stun is a really nice surprise for enemies trying to kill you, so this is fairly effective. I also have been known on occasion to grab Erosion, alright? If the enemy team comp has a lot of either shells or people who give themselves shields, Erosion is really nice. I don't really build a whole lot of these other ones, although if you're really fond of Archdruid's Fury, this is not bad. I just am not the biggest fan of this myself. I think it's really awkward to use, as a personal opinion. I don't like Stone of Binding because there's not really a whole lot of crowd control he's got. He has a slow on his pulse, a stun if you hold Gungnir all the way there, right, for the third pulse. And they're already going to have been affected by the slow, so you're just refreshing that effect. And then you have a slow on your ult. That's really it. If you intend on running Mystic Bauble or Sphinx's Bauble and ult botting, basically, this can be very useful in that circumstance, but unless you're really trying to use your ult as often as possible, I would recommend against this. Alright, you're just not going to trigger it often enough to make that worthwhile. And then Abyssal Stone, you're really relying on your allies to have the crowd control to make this matter. Your ult isn't really going to get a lot of benefit from this because they're slowed when they're in the circle. They're not slowed when they're not in it, right? That's literally just, they're slowed for 2.5 seconds, right? Which increases very slightly. It's really not that big of a deal. You don't get a whole lot of benefit out of this Abyssal Stone as Odin. Your allies will, do not misunderstand me, but your allied team comp has to be really heavy on the crowd control to make this worthwhile, right? So I'm not really that fond of building this either. But let's assume my usual favorite, which is Spirit Robe, and then we'll talk about our pure magic protections. Now, the item I normally go to if my landing opponent is magic, or for my 5th slot magic protection item, is Oni Hunter's Garb. Again, this comes back to the damage mitigation really helping your shield last longer. Same exact idea here. We really don't need more cooldown. We already have 10% baseline as a warrior. We have 20% in our items, and a Potion of Power will give us 40%. So we really don't need Genji's Guard for the cooldowns. We don't need that. We don't need Shogun's Kusaria because we're ability based, and we don't need the attack speed, and usually somebody else is going to grab this anyways. So this isn't really hugely necessary either. There are situations in which this is useful, but that's a conversation for different Odins. And then, of course, our final possible item, if it's not going to be Sphinx's Bauble, we've got some other options, right? Again, just want to mention Heartseeker is a really great last item. Dawnbringer is a really great last item as well. These are both fantastic. If you need a little bit more damage because your team just isn't hitting hard enough, you can go with the Crusher, which is going to give you a little power. It's going to give your abilities more bonus damage. It's going to give you a little bit of penetration, and it's going to give you a little attack speed. Now, attack speed isn't that big of a deal for Odin, but a lot of people don't know that his first pulse increases attack speed, including his. So, watch my attack speed. It is 1.22 right now, alright? One pulse, boom, throw the spirits, 1.52 right now. Wears off, 1.22, alright? With the Crusher, this actually can be very useful for Odin trying to take towers, jungle bosses, etc. Not a bad deal for also getting additional bonus ability damage, right? Again, this is for squishier enemy team comps. If they're tankier, then you're obviously going to want to go to Heartseeker, right? Another interesting option is Hydra's Lament if you really want, which also makes, by the way, fun fact, for a great second item on Odin if you don't like Soul Eater. And this is mostly because a lot of Odin's abilities are really interesting in their application of how quickly you can trigger them. Let me actually grab Hydra's Lament really quick. And let me show you. Because you can get, say, for example, we jump in here, slap, activate the shield, slap, Gungnir slap, attack speed increase just because I wasn't patient there. She jumps, I use my ult, and I slap, right? Hydra's Lament, although you're not focusing purely on damage as Odin, Hydra's Lament is a surprisingly powerful item to use on him, even in the solo lane. Again, this makes for a really uniquely good second item for a number of reasons. First off, regardless of the stage of the game, the additional 30% of your basic attack damage is going to be really nice. Your basic attack damage isn't going to go up a whole lot as a solo lane Odin because you're not building a whole lot of power. Yeah, it'll go up some. Yes, this goes a little farther in late game, but in the early game, you're getting cooldown, you're getting mana, you get the passive that increases your MP5, which is really nice for Odin, and you get that 30 power, right? Again, the penetration isn't really that meaningful early game. That's fine, but you do get 10% cooldown reduction there, alright? So you do have that really great benefit. It's very nice. Alright. So we also have that option, right? Let's go on ahead and grab Dawnbringer for kicks, and then at this point, of course, as our last item, we would get Sphinx's Bauble. You can see right now we have 54 seconds on this. If I were to purchase a Potion of Power and use this, lo and behold, there it goes. It wasn't registering it live, apparently. So you can see with the Potion of Power, the Ring of Power, Lord of the Rings, my goodness. Anyways, we have 45-second cooldown on this. We have effectively got back to the feared, the famous 45-second cooldown Ring of Spears Odin, which decimated the meta years ago. I think it's been 3 years, but anyways, it might have been 4. This is the point of Sphinx's Bauble, is to get this this running, right? Of course, we also would want to increase our Sundering Axe, and we have decent protections there. We're sitting above 150 of each protection. We, of course, have decent power here. We've got almost 200 power. It's a nice little setup. But again, if you're not really looking to absolutely blast everyone with your ult, you can instead get the delicious Hydra's Lament, or you can increase your protections a little bit more. You could absolutely go for Erosion, or maybe, you know, if you are, again, let's actually set up that build I was talking about earlier. Set up Sphinx's Bauble, and then run the Stone of Bindings. We could just absolutely blast people with decreased protections, a slow effect, just get absolutely out of control here. Totally a viable option, right? Absolutely fantastic. And all of this is great, right? You have a couple of different options. Again, let's just recap really briefly. Really brief recap. Starter item for Odin. Warrior's Axe for defensive solo lane Odin. Bluestone Pendant for more aggressive solo lane Odin. Second item. Mystical Earrings if you want a late game Sphinx's Baubles. If you don't want a late game Sphinx's Baubles, your best bets are Soul Eater to give you an edge in your ult. Dawnbringer to give you a different, more defensive edge in your ult. Or Hydra's Lament to give you a little bit of power early on in the game and really great MP5, as well as some cooldowns. Let's, we're just going to set up Hydra's Lament for this example. Second item, Gladiator's Shield if your lending opponent is physical, Oni Hunter's Garb if not. We're going to assume physical in this sample, Gladiator's Shield. Dual protections. Either Spirit Robe or Mantle of Discord, or if you prefer one of these, again, except possibly for Abyssal Stone, strongly recommend against that. These other three can be useful if you like them. Alright, that's down to your personal preference. We're going to run, well, in this particular case, because I've already got 20% off of these, we're going to go with Erosion here. Magic Protections, of course, is next. We've already talked about those. And then your final item, which in this case will grab Dawnbringer for fun. Alright? Adjust as necessary. If, for example, these protections are too low because the enemy team is killing you too quickly, maybe you would swap that out for one of the stones. Right? Specifically, one of these stones. Again, your preference. So, that is generally how I like to approach Odin. You might be wondering, well, Professor, why not go auto-attack Odin? Gungnir's Might on that first pulse can increase attack speed. Is there a world in which you can run auto-attack Odin? The answer to that is fairly interesting, because you have to play Odin a rather specific way if you're going to pull this off. Now, if you are going to pull this off, you still have the same options for your starter items. The only thing that changes is what you evolve them into. So you can actually, early on in the game, and this is one of the reasons why I talked about those specific starter items, that was not accidental. You still have your option of Bluestone or Warrior's Axe. The difference here is with Bluestone, if you were going ability-based Odin, you would obviously be going into Bluestone Brooch. But if you want to go with the auto-attack Odin, Corrupted Bluestone is the way to go. You're still obviously going to be getting some bonus damage on your abilities, because all of your abilities do damage, and why the hell not? I will mention, it's worth mentioning, that because Corrupted Bluestone also decreases attack speed of victims, of your targets, I almost always go with this option if the enemy team composition has an absurd amount of auto-attackers. Say they have a Mercury jungle and an Oloran mid with your any random hunter in the ADC role, right? That's 3 auto-attackers, Mercury, Oloran, and say Izanami, right? Great enemy setup for a defensive auto-attack Odin running Bluestone. You might be wondering, well, Professor, why not use Mannequin Scepter? That's primarily because Mannequin Scepter requires your auto-attacks hit, and for Odin, it is significantly easier to hit with your abilities, whether you're throwing Gungnir's Spear from a distance, which is going to proc this right off the top, or you're jumping in with Bird Bomb or no, it's still going to trigger this, right? So for Odin, trying to reduce enemy attack speed, Corrupted Bluestone is the significantly more consistent option. If you're looking to decrease enemy attack speed, you never want to go with Mannequin Scepter. It's never going to match Corrupted Bluestone in terms of consistency. Furthermore, this is also going to increase your protections, and you are a solo lane Odin, so it is worth running this for the increased protections and the increased attack speed. If you want to be a bit more defensive about it, obviously you could go Axe of Animosity. Alright. Now, in this particular instance, we are going to run the Corrupted Bluestone example, because between the two of these for an auto-attack Odin, it's my preference. Now, we still go back to the second items, and the second item options are identical. The beautiful thing about Odin is we can flex him into the role we want. It's by the third item that we really need to buckle down and make a choice. Soul Eater, whether you're going ability-based or auto-attack Odin, is going to give you some lifesteal to give you that edge in your ult, to give you a little bit of sustain. Hydra's Lament, useful if you're using ability or auto-attack Odin. This is going to be really nice. Dawnbringer, same deal. The only real difference here is if you intend on running auto-attack Odin, or you might possibly run auto-attack Odin, you haven't decided by the start of the match, don't build the earrings. Basically the only thing that changes here. Not a viable option. If you're going to focus on auto-attacks for Odin, or you have the possibility to do so, you aren't going to want Sphinx's Baubles. You're going to want to rush out a bit of early damage right off the top. Okay? In this particular example, I'm going to run very specifically the Soul Eater, because again, if I'm looking to do that auto attack damage, I'm looking to get that lifesteal. I'm always losing this. There's the item stacks. if we're, you know, looking to increase our attack speed, the lifesteal from that is going to go a little bit farther. All right. Second item. Now, excuse me, not our second item. Our third item. This is where the rubber hits the road. This is where you are going to need to ask yourself damn quick, okay, am I going to dedicate to the auto attack or am I going to dedicate to the ability? Because your shield changes. Obviously, if you're going with the auto attack, you're going to run Berserker's Shield, right? Increase attack speed, health. Great passive. While Berserk at 5% damage mitigation, helps your shield immensely. Lovely time. Love to see this. Alright, this is a really great benefit here. Big fan of this. We're pretending the auto attack build here, so I am going to grab Berserker's Shield. We'll talk about the magic protections a little bit later. Now, for your dual protections with this build, this does change. I usually actually use Archdruid's Fury here because I am looking to more consistently use my auto attacks. You're more likely to actually proc this. Okay, this is where I usually use this. For abilities, this is fairly inconsistent because your goal isn't to hit auto attacks. You only use auto attacks with ability-based Odin whenever you're waiting for your cooldowns, right? But for an auto attack Odin, this is great because you're actually trying to set yourself up to be in a position to auto attack. So you actually get these great benefits here. So this is usually the dual protection item I'll run on an auto attack focused Odin. And of course, obviously we would get Shogun's Kusari. Now, very important, always Shogun's Kusari. 2 reasons. 1, this gives you cooldown. Even though we're looking at an auto attack based Odin, we still cannot ignore the fact that our abilities are really good, especially Gungnir's Might, which can increase our attack speed, and given that in most of these times when I build this, I'm looking for Corrupted Bluestone to increase my attack speed, I want to be hitting abilities. So, just for the 10% cooldown reduction alone, Shogun's Kusari beats Talisman of Energy. But the second reason is if you are looking to boost your allies' attack speed in moments of attacking towers or jungle bosses or whatever, this stacks really well with that. That is a really nice, I think it's 50% total? It's 60% total. A 60% boost in allied attack speed if they're close enough to that pulse, right? That's gross. If you're running an auto attack Odin, never Talisman of Energy, always Shogun's Kusari, alright? And now, for your final item, again, this really depends on whether or not you need damage. If you need damage, you're looking purely at chin size. Alright? If you really need damage. For tankier comps. Basically, instead of Heartseeker being an option, you're swapping out Heartseeker for chin size. The Crusher is still going to be useful regardless. Don't care which version of Odin you're running. If, by the way, this is another fun fact, if by the third item you're still not sure if you want to run auto attack or ability-based Odin, build the Crusher third and play a bit more cautiously. The only real thing that has to change here if you build the Crusher third is your aggression. You have to remember that if you're building the Crusher as a third item, you're going to need to relax, because you're not as tanky as you might be used to. You're going to be building that defense in the second half of the game, so you will need to relax a little bit on your aggression, because you're not going to be as tanky as you're mentally going to be used to as a solo lane Odin. Alright, just wanted that out there first, okay? Just so you know. But this is still a really good item if the enemy team composition is higher in damage and lower in defense. Of course, if you need more protections, again, you can just fall back on good old Spirit Robe or Mantle of Discord if you really want to. You could go, of course, also Toxic Blade, but I don't usually use this. If you're going to run Toxic Blade, it's very specifically for the attack speed reduction on top of the Corrupted Bluestone. Again, not usually necessary, but it's an option. Again, Erosion still can remain rather consistently useful. So if you need more defense, Erosion works. Stone of Binding can work. I really don't recommend it for the attack speed build specifically. But you can, right? In this particular instance, we're going to... Let's hypothetical out the Crusher just for kicks, and then of course we use Corrupted Bluestone. Now the main problem with Attack Speed Odin, I'm so lost, is you're basically never going to want to use the stun. There are going to be moments where you will, when you're trying to engage an enemy at range, or you're trying to stop an enemy, you're going to want to use that, but a lot of the times, you're going to want to, you know... And then you're going to use your shield to basically... Your shield, interestingly enough, with an Attack Speed Odin, your shield isn't about actually keeping you alive, alright? I'm sorry, for damage. I flipped that in my head. Your shield is not about damage. Ability-based Odin typically uses this Raven Shield as a source of damage. Attack Speed Odin uses this for the defensive boost to buy him extra time to auto-attack. Basically, Odin rarely can out-damage other auto-attackers. If you were to go against an Erlong Shen, and you weren't using Raven Shield, you would lose that. Your edge there is very specifically the Raven Shield. But you have to be smart about using it. That's going to come down to timing. If you're facing somebody with better auto-attacks than you, for example, let's pretend you're facing Erlong Shen. Alright, let's just pretend that for a minute. He activates his first ability, which gives him boosted attack speed and lifesteal. You're going to need to activate your shield in response to that, so that way the brunt of that is eaten by the shield. And then carry on as normal. It's the only way you're going to win that. And even then, the Mink form is still going to give him boosted attack speed, or he could get a shield of his own using the turtle. So you're still going to have a hard time here, and you're going to need to rely on Gungnir's Might First Pulse to increase your attack speed to match his damage in those situations, and basically trade blow for blow, relying heavily on the Raven Shield to sort of not die. Alright? It's a completely different way of approaching Odin. It really is. Is it effective? Conditionally, yes. Alright, whether or not Attack Speed Odin is going to work depends very heavily on the enemy team composition. The only real exception to this is if you have somebody on your team actively looking to boost attack speed. For example, maybe you've got a Fafnir as your support. I would probably lean more towards an Attack Speed Odin in that particular match, because I know Fafnir is going to possibly coerce me, which is going to increase my attack speed and give him bonus damage, right? Through my auto attacks. But it's something you're going to have to decide for yourself. Now, again, this is why the Corrupted Bluestone specifically is so significant to the Attack Speed Odin. It's... Look, consider this. Just as an example. Boom. Alright, we've got some stuff going on here. We're, you know, blasting out the damage here. Okay, she's got her abilities up. We're going to use this for the protections, right? Now, our alternative here is Animosity. Right? Again, which one you want is going to come down to your preference. It becomes this really interesting mixture. Animosity, Acts of Animosity, has the unique benefit of giving you magic damage, so you're going to catch enemy tanks off guard more. If I'm looking to auto-attack with Odin, and the enemy team composition is on the tankier side, Animosity is generally going to do you a little bit more good than Corrupted Bluestone. If the enemy team is higher in damage, Corrupted Bluestone is going to do you more good, because you're going to have that flat damage on your abilities, you're going to be reducing their attack speed, right? And you're going to be increasing your protections. Okay? Again, my personal preference, and usually when I bust out Attack Speed Odin, is very specifically in terms of the enemy team composition is high in damage and pumping out a lot of attack speed. This can be very effective against that. Alright? Now, This episode has reached half an hour. I'm going to try to keep these particular episodes not an hour long. I find that these episodes are too long. We're going to talk about Jungle Odin in a separate video because he is just as intricate to build as solo lane Odin. He's got sort of similar options, leaning obviously a bit more on the damage, but we're going to talk about that in a separate episode. I don't want to stretch this out too long. I want to be right to the point here. This is solo lane Odin. Functionally, you have two different Odins you can build, ability or auto attack. And you can, in theory, on paper, you can stall out which one you want to play until your fourth item. Again, you can use the Crusher as your third item, just be a bit more careful. But you can stall out 3 items before you make that decision. But by the fourth item, you will have to have decided, because it is at the latest the fourth item where you are going to have to make that decision and commit. Don't try to use both. Alright? We've got some elements of both in this build that I've got here. Corrupted Bluestone still helps his abilities, Soul Eater still heals you off of his abilities, and the Crusher gives his abilities some extra bonus damage, but the main focus here is on attack speed. Again, swapping the 3 protection items for something that gives you ability-based damage, Gladiator's Shield, Oni Hunter's Garb for increased protections, Spirit Robe for better cooldowns. There's that, right? That's looking more towards the abilities. Don't commit too hard. I mean, if you really, really wanted to, you could swap out Berserker's Shield for Glad's Shield here and run a little bit of extra damage on your abilities, but this is going to hurt your attack speed. This is going to lose you some damage mitigation. I have not had that work well for me, personally. That might possibly be partially due to my playstyle. I tend to be a little bit more aggressive with auto-attacking when I'm an auto-attacker, so that might just be a me problem, but nevertheless, at the end of the day, these are the 2 primary ways in which you can run Odin. Broadly speaking, I prefer ability-based. It's just how I'm more comfortable playing him. This comes from my support background. If you're a more aggressive player, you probably will like the attack speed Odin a little bit better. And remember, your last item is flexible. Build what you need. I have the Crusher as my last item here, because in this example, I would have committed to the build by item 3, which is usually when I commit to a build on Odin. That's usually when I make my decision, is the third item. Again, you can stall this out, but if you don't, your last item is the flex pick. Pick what you need. Look at your team. Who's having a hard time? Compensate. Is your ADC having a hard time? The Crusher. Is your Mage having a hard time? Heartseeker, right? Or possibly still the Crusher, right? Is your support having a hard time? Dawnbringer. Okay? Cover the holes of your team. It's your job as support. That is your job. And Odin is really good at this. But remember, Odin does not want attrition wars. Odin is designed and should play very all or nothing. If you're going to go in, at least take someone with you, because Odin is not built for sustain when a lot of his opposition is built for at least some sustain. Kill them or die trying, basically. With that being said, thank you all very much for listening. If you liked this, please like and subscribe. If you didn't, please ignore me. And if you have any comments, questions, concerns, ideas, suggestions, or requests, please leave them down in the comment section below. And thank you all very much for joining me, and have a great 24 hours.